This is your V1 front panel. Hear that? This is a sneak peek at the V2 panel. Ah, this one's solid. It's like armor. I like this one. Welcome to Machines More. Hope you're all having a happy new year. Fresh off the heels of the NCase M1EVO review, that was for the V1/V1.1, we have a V2 already, and it's just a little bit of a sneak preview because this isn't in production yet. But today I hope to give you a look at the changes for the parts, and we'll transfer some of these contents over to the new case, and we'll do a little bit of a comparison. The main difference here is that this U9S will be replaced by a bigger air cooler because this one is going to be wider, so that will give us a little bit more freedom for air cooling. For AIO, that's not going to be a big change there, so we won't retest that. But before we get started, I did want to show you something that I called out in the earlier review, and it's related to the power supply. You'll remember, if you saw the review, that the power supply bracket, it allows the power supply to shake. Now, it's not actually a huge issue when you have case fans installed next to it, because the movement is limited by that. But if you didn't have case fans here, this could potentially swing a lot. Now, in communication with NCase on that, there is a solution, and it's not specifically called out in the manual, but I'm going to take this out and I'll show you actually what the manufacturer recommendation is for installing this power supply bracket. And that position does not allow this to swing whether you have case fans or not. So let's take a look there first. It's only secured, well, partly secured, because it's just hanging by the front panel. It's got two screws there that the bracket is hanging from. So we're going to take this out and we're going to reposition the power supply bracket, and that can attach to the main board panel, and that will restrict its movement. This does require the power supply bracket to be oriented in with these holes lined up to the cage. Okay, and then when you take this over and place it in the case, that is going to line up all the way with the mainboard panel. With this power supply installed in this position, if you don't secure it down to the front panel, it will still move, and that can be disconcerting for some. Okay, so this is just an example position here. It'll line up here, and you can just take one of those M3 screws and attach it to here. Okay, I probably would loosen everything up a little bit just to make sure it all lines up properly, and then if we just tighten this front here all the way down, and you'll see there's no play anymore. Pretty much better than it was before. Now, the one thing I noticed though was it does make the case fans here very tight. Okay, so you do have to be a little more cautious on how these go in, but okay, so those still line up with the holes. One scenario where this might not be as ideal is if you're using an M1EVO board, since that's going to go all the way to this position over here. And if you wanted to do side panel fans, that's not going to happen with this position, because this is all the way flush with the motherboard side panel. So normally those 92mm fans could go here right up to the point of the M1EVO board. So unfortunately you do give up that position. So throughout my testing, I didn't even notice that you could put the power supply into that position and then secure it down, which is nice because it doesn't rock anymore. As mentioned, it does come with a set of downsides for M1EVO board users, but for most of you that are building with mini-itx, this is going to be the way to go, and that will alleviate concerns on the power supply rocking. And they are updating the documentation, the manual, to show that. I know the manual still seems kind of like a rough draft thing, so yeah, that's a solution there. All right, so on to the V2 content. Like many of you I'm a little surprised that the V2 is coming so soon, considering that the V1.1 is just shipping right now. So if you are considering whether, do I pick up the 1.1, do I get the V2, you know, you might want to take a closer look here, because those differences, it's not just material quality, the dimensions are going to be different. And as I am told, this is, even though the parts I received, they're prototype parts, this is pretty close to what the final version is going to look like. And this should be shipping, I think it was end of January. So completely different supply chain though. They're not going to be sharing the old factory anymore. These parts being prototype parts, they're going to show some blemishes from already having been tested with and built in already. I don't expect that with the final version, but I am told the final dimensions should be pretty similar to what we have here. But big thanks to them for sending this by for us to review and kind of show you guys what the differences are going to be. And the objective here also is to get you guys, you know, not just familiarized with the differences between the V1.1 and the V2, is also to get some feedback, because there is still time. Maybe you can make, maybe NCase can make some tweaks here, and I know they are fairly diligent about reviewing the feedback from our viewers here. So if there are questions, comments, feel free to sound off in the comment section below, and go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because there's gonna be a lot more content on this case coming up here. So the first thing that you'll notice about the V2 panel is that it is hefty. It's really, really, really heavy, and it's not just because it's about 6 millimeters wider. Measures in at 166 millimeters, and the V1/1.1, the back here, it was 160, and that's going to mean a little bit better air cooler clearance. So just take a look at the scale here. V1.1/V1 panel, and it's got some of the accoutrement here, but don't worry, we'll just, you know, get a reference here. 436 grams, minus a little for the extra brackets that are on here already. Okay, and the new one is a whopping 557 grams. So the new front panel is about 30% more mass, and you don't need to really weigh it to tell. You can just holding it, you can tell it's significantly beefier. You know, from the intro, you can tell the sound. It's this is solid. It's step in good direction. Although it's going to make your case pretty heavy, though. I have not felt the front panel of a case this heavy before. Let's take a look at the rear panel. Old one, 1.1, comes in at 146 grams. 229. This guy went to the gym, you know? It's that beefy. The amount of material in between, it's significantly thicker. There's a lot more holding it together compared to the V1 here. Okay, so that's the rear panels. We'll set those aside. Alright, so this is the new power supply bracket. See how chunky this is? It is not the thin piece like before. Okay. And if you just compare it with the old one, and this one is CNC, so a lot higher quality than the old one. So whatever changes they're doing here, you know, it's huge step forward. First on the left is the V1.1, and on the right is the V2. Not a whole lot of difference here other than the width. 6 millimeter difference. Range 166 here on the new one. 159.5, 160-ish on the old one. So yeah, the difference is 6 millimeters there. We did the front panel and the rear panel. Let's talk about the mainboard panel, the V2 on top here. This vertical strut where the mini-itx standoffs would go is actually further out. Otherwise, the dimensions here are mostly the same, so I don't think that length is going to change. A couple subtle differences here just with the positioning of the holes, and we'll see that when we put it together. The most positive change here. This is the side panel, the radiator panel. I called this out in the V1.1 review. It's kind of half-baked because it's just half a panel. V2. Look at that. And it's thinner too. And the new one is significantly lower profile than the old one. So that was going to result in some additional gains if you're using the radiator panel. Alright, so I got this far putting this thing together, and I gotta say it's a lot more solid than the other one. I mean, it just feels a lot more hefty. You know, it's definitely got a lot more going on here than the old one. But one thing they're doing, they're including 5mm tall standoffs instead of, well, they'll probably still going to be including the standard ones, but these are a little bit shorter. You do decrease the distance between the back of your board and the case, so do be a little bit careful if you are deploying that. But this will buy you another millimeter or so, and with the case being 6mm wider, altogether that's about 7mm of space. So hopefully that's enough to clear the D12L, and we'll give it a test run here. So one major difference here on the front panel and the PSU, remember I showed you the CNC PSU bracket, that appears to connect directly to the front panel instead of using the, you know, kind of loose system here. Rock solid. It's got 2 screws over here on the main board side connecting that together, so that power supply is not going to move anywhere. In fact, this is even more secure than the M1 Classic. And so for those of you that have concerns about the power supply mounting on the 1.1, this you're going to like this. What it may pose a problem for is if you wanted to lower it to accommodate fans over here. If you can clear your motherboard heatsink, I think you'll still be fine for 2 fans here. With M1EVO, that's going to be a little bit tricky, just because you do not, you know, your board may have a heatsink that juts out here, so you might only be able to get 1 top case fan here. So again, trade-offs with M1EVO. On the main board panel, this is the V1.1. Recall that the position of this third vertical member here between the V2 and the V1.1 that was not the same. The V1.1 relied on the holes here to position the standoffs for the M1EVO motherboard, so it had to be aligned. With the V2, it doesn't actually rely on that vertical piece for the standoff positions, and I'll show you right here. And the V2, it's just actually going to rely on these holes that are drilled here. They're kind of offset from the those main holes here. This hole and this hole here, that's going to be your standoff on the right side of your M1EVO motherboard. Another change here is that the V2 standoff positions are finite. In the 1.1, you had one side that had pre-drilled holes, and then this kind of infinity positioning, which, you know, more or less doesn't make sense because it's a square board, right? So it's gonna have to line up with a set position anyway, even if you had the freedom here. So change here, that's good, because that takes the guesswork out of the equation. You don't have to kind of move it back and forth. It's not like motherboard standoffs are drilled funny sometimes. You know, they're all standard. So when that's all put together, you should expect something like this on the V2. The whole thing is a lot more solid here for sure. Okay, quick check here. D12L is in, and the panel just about clears. It definitely touches the tips of the heat pipe, but all right, just like that. So seems to be optimized for this cooler. So one thing I noticed was that this one, it just barely fits the D12L, and to do that we had to use those lower 5mm standoffs, and that puts a little bit of a gap here between the motherboard and the grill here. And so that's a little bit unsightly, and plus the motherboard's not supported there. So I do hope there's something that can be done about that. So I got this all built up, just a quick and dirty build here. There's not even a front I/O panel yet. They didn't send one. I'm assuming they're still getting that worked out because the V1 1.1 version didn't fit in here, so it's going to be a new setup. In order to accommodate the D12L and also the top fans, I did need to bring that motherboard down 2 spots compared to where I had the U9S in the V1.1. I did need to elevate it off the work surface a little bit because I had used these smaller rubber feet before I found that I had an extra set of the classic feet. But you know, it's going to do the same thing, just bringing it up off the work surface to match that height. And the GPU being in this lower position does matter, actually, because it without the extra elevation, the GPU thermals are really going to suffer. And I managed to fit the radiator panel at the top because it won't fit at the front when I'm using the D12L. But one of the things to note is that at least in this current prototype version, the top panel won't close with the screw here. It just so happens that if you put the screw here at the end, the panel won't latch in. So I'm not sure if this rad panel is what is going to be on the final V2 version, but I did kind of just make it work for testing. Thermals actually are pretty good in this setup. D12L, I only ran this fan, the single fan, at 1500 RPM. There's no rear fan here. Pretty comparable CPU thermals. This is much quieter than the U9S because I had that 92mm fan running way fast along with the rear panel fan. This is not noise normalized. The GPU I ran at the same fan RPM. Seems to work pretty well compared to the U9S setup here. So, you know, performance, it's going to be dependent on what cooler you choose. Just noting that you can fit a slightly larger tower cooler in here. So we talked about the width on this version increasing by about 6mm, at least in the current iteration of the V2 that I have here. Again, not final specs yet, so things may change. It's also 1.5mm taller. So the main change there is the width. The length doesn't really change. I measured it at 366. That puts this version at the V2 prototype I have here at 15.6 liters. It does grow about half a liter versus the V1/V1.1. So yeah, it's a little bit bigger than the C4 SFX in terms of the volume, and you know, both take the D12L, but this one is going to have the added advantage of those side panel fans. I'm curious how the top fan bracket is going to be in the final version, so when I hear anything, I will let you guys know. This obviously is still a prototype. I am told that the dimensions are pretty close to the final, but I'm sure the details are still being finalized here. Whatever they're doing here is a lot more magical here. I think the design is just, you know, just better. And when they have this fan bracket at the top, when you can have this all screwed down, this thing is really not going to move. It's not going to move laterally or vertically. The sturdiness of everything is really a big factor here. Beefier front panel, you know, slightly beefier rear panel. There's just more material here. That the power supply bracket really solid. Maybe the most solid power supply mount I've seen in any SFF case. I mean, this thing is really beefed up. And I am curious what you guys think about this case. Is the extra volume or reduced space efficiency worth it? I like this version for really just the sturdiness. Now, I didn't have a big complaint about how the V1 or 1.1 felt, but this is just higher quality all around. The panels, the finish is even smoother than the 1.1. I like the radiator bracket a lot. Of course, you can't fit it with that cooler there. So hopefully, maybe there's going to be a solution to put a side fan here. Not sure if that's possible. Thanks for checking this one out with me. It's been a lot of fun. Look forward to additional news on this case. There's tons more content coming. So make sure you are subscribed if you're not already. And please give a like. It really helps the channel out. I'll leave some of the links for the build components down below. And thanks for watching.